too low, so yell if you don't hear me. Well, first of all, I wish to thank very warmly the program committee for inviting me to Helsinki and to this fantastic occasion to meet so many people engaged in the Nordic and in Nordic museology. And so dear friends and colleagues, I feel very proud being here, and I certainly feel very proud to be able to present you some thoughts for the future, which are actually not just thoughts, they are also being realized and will be realized over the next, I hope, knock on the wood, over the next 5 years. And I have titled my speech today, the Nordisk Museet in Stockholm in a Globalized World, from Swedish to Nordic and Global Perspectives. And it's a very long and complicated title, and as a matter of fact, I think I could also just have called it Opening Up, Opening Up, Opening Up, Opening Up, Opening Up. Because this is really what I feel we are doing with the Nordisk Museum, and this is our main task in the years to come. And we have worked with this issue, opening up, opening up, opening up, in 3 years. I hope, maybe I should ask first, how many people have know the Nordisk Museum? This is what I wanted to see. My next rhetorical question is, how many people have been there within the last 5 years? Oh, that was a surprise. I'm very happy to see that, because as I hope this little image will suggest to you, I have the great pleasure to be in honor of a beloved museum. The Nordisk Museum is a museum you cannot miss when you are in Stockholm. No matter where you are in Stockholm, you will see this amazing building which was ready in 1907. Scandinavistic fantasy castle. And it is amazing. And as I said, it is a beloved museum. But beloved doesn't necessarily mean that visitors are crowding in the museum. Because in spite of what we just saw now, we frequently meet visitors around when we are in our inquiries and where we are moving around, and asking the same questions as I just did. Do you know the Nordisk Museum? Oh, yes, we know the Nordisk Museum. It's a lovely museum. And then the next question, well, when were you last there? Oh, well, as a child, 4 years ago. Oh, that's lovely. You mustn't change anything. So, and frankly speaking, you very quickly get home blind because it is an amazing place. And it's also, as I see it, a courageous museum, because as many of you will know, there is actually no other museum anywhere in the world except now for Seattle. But we will leave that aside. There's no other museum, the so-called encyclopedic museums, British Museum, Metropolitan, etc. You cannot go to a department called the Nordic region. You can go to the Mediterranean, you can go to the Asian department and so forth, but you cannot go to a Nordic region. So I think this museum is extremely courageous, because it's actually trying to describe the country it's situated in, and also originally the ambition was to describe the region. And that's much more difficult than describing others. So, as I said, a courageous museum. Now, we are a foundation. We are not under the government directly. We are a foundation. It's Arthur Hazelius who founded the museum, and that means that we do not take instructions from the government. We have guidelines, but not instructions. And in fact, the government is cutting us every year with 2%. So our loyalties are definitely with good old Arthur. His logo is, and that's important, is a saying from the Delphic oracle, "Know thyself," but it's written on a runic stone. And I like this logo because it says so much about the time that the museum was part of. And they're full of these interesting quotations. You have to remember that Arthur Hazelius, he was a philologist. He knew, of course, ancient Greek and Latin and all that. He was not particularly interested. He wanted to do, he was much more of an entrepreneur. Did not want to sit with books. But he certainly knew his classics, and lots of sort of quotations in the building, which reveal the time spirit where things went back to Greece. And one of them is this curious relief at the door entrance of a spinning woman. This is sitting in a pose which was very much used at that time, which is actually taken from the so-called Merlin Penelope sitting at her loom, waiting for Odysseus to appear. And this Merlin pose of this patient, beautiful housewife, it went into all sorts of motifs at that time. So they're full of these quotations. And we should also remember that it's a museum which collected enormously amount of objects from Nordic countries. And they certainly didn't stay within Swedish borders at that time. It was much more grand perception of Swedish territories, but also expanding that the so-called Swedish imperial empire. Talk to you later about that expression. Going to Baltic countries and even Greenland. It is one of the many curators at that time, Louise Harper. Arthur, he employed a whole army of women, and they were extremely efficient. It's amazing what they did. They went around the whole country, and I said, in all these countries, collecting items. And it's a huge achievement. And it means that today we have absolutely the largest collection of, for instance, dress and textiles, amazing collections. And here I show you an example from the folk art exhibition, wedding dresses with, among other things, tablet woven bands. I'm into tablet weaving sort of archaeologically. I will not bore you with that, except you force me to it. Amazing collections. So what do we have? Well, due to these hectic activities and grand visions, today we have 1.5 million museums items. Later, a castle, summer residence, manor, villa, 460 historic buildings were added to the foundation. We have 5 historic parks. We have 2,200 hectare historic landscapes. We have hunting and fishing rights, but they are expensive if you want to use them. We have a research library, and today we have, if we count them as we like to do, 46 exhibitions in Stockholm, 23 at Göteborg. We have a publishing section, and we also count our digital museum. Now, so briefly, here you have Nordisk in Stockholm, in Djurgården. It would be like having a castle like that in Hyde Park or in Nationalklubben in Klampenborg. Julita Manor in south of Stockholm, and in Tyresö to the east of Stockholm, and Hergeberga near Uppsala and Svedasvik within Stockholm. We are about 155 hard-working people. We are already so efficient that we cannot be more efficient. But we are dedicated. That's our weapon. Now, it is this museum with this splendid background that I will now, together with my 155 hardworking people, try and develop over the coming years till we, in 2023, we celebrate 150-year anniversary, and try and open up this museum into a much more globalized world, which is, of course, the reality of Sweden and has always been. And again, what are we opening up? Well, I just added a lot of things here. We'll come back to them later. Because basically what we are opening up is all of these aspects. It's how we think about social structures, it's how we think about timelines, space, physical borders, accessibility, but also mental accessibility, audiences, and we want to collaborate much more than we do today within and outside Sweden, and across all sorts of disciplines and with the audiences. We want to open up everything. So, how do we go about to reach this more globalized Nordic museum? Well, as I said, we are a foundation and we have to go by our charters. And one of them, very loosely translated, is this one. The Nordisk Museet must preserve and activate the memory of life and work in Sweden from the year of 1520 and onwards. As you see already here, we are bordered, and we need to unborder ourselves. We need to interpret what Arthur meant, because I'm sure he would have done that if he was alive today. He would have unboarded himself. And we need to go outside Sweden. We need to problematize what we mean with that and the Nordic region. And as I said, we need to work with timelines. I will come back to that. So, what can we open up? Well, we can go from objects, or rather from life and work, to say, well, it's the people living and working that we want to deal with. And I like to say that we're dealing with people and blood, sweat and tears. Real people. We need to approach social structures totally open-minded. Show you one example here from a new showcase in our exhibition on fashion, with mainstream young people in mainstream fashion. And what's important here is that they are actual people. You can listen to each of them talk about why they dress the way they do. So they're actual people, they're not sort of prestige people or something, they're real people. Another example is from a new temporary exhibition on the 50s and women and work in the 50s, where we have carefully selected dresses from our amazing collections, which we actually know who wore them, and the stories these women who wore these dresses have been recorded, and that adds this blood, sweat and tears dimension to the dresses, which we want to pursue. And we, of course, include in an exhibition like that contemporary women who have various viewpoints on 50s. And lots and lots of people engage in this exhibition. They can contemplate about certain questions like how do you think it will be to be a woman in 2050? After having contemplated how was it in the 50s, that kind of things. Now, moving into spatial borders, or space. Well, it's one of my really challenges, I think. I like to speculate here. And I think we need to go from people in fixed spaces, like nation states and nations. If you remember Niels Holgersson, Niels flying up there, looking down on Sweden, and is seeing all these differences in the landscapes of Sweden. But he doesn't sort of go outside Sweden. So for some reason, this goose doesn't really leave Sweden. And when BBC does their reports, and they're very active at the moment, quite fun to watch these YouTubes. One is called Good Sweden and Bad Sweden, two narratives. But in a way, they're also closed, even if they try to use the bridge between Denmark and Sweden. But still, it's an interesting approach. But I think we need to go to what I like sometimes call human geographies. And I love that Wallace in the British Museum with shows sailing in unknown waters. He has no idea where he will land next time and what the people will be like. He has no map. He's guided by his own emotions, but he's also guided by nostalgia. He wants to return home eventually, but he's sort of investigating this unknown region. And it is these human geographies that I think we need to pursue, because people have always moved, we always move, we intermarry, we move, we migrate, ideas move. You cannot constrain people and our minds, and therefore our geographies are much more human. To give you just a very sort of concrete example lately, what we have done in Tyresö Castle outside Stockholm has traditionally been very much presented as a 16th to 17th century, 18th century castle, very much focused on, there's a man, believe me, in the middle among the women and children, and that's Claes Lagergren. So it's been very much a sort of a male perspective and Swedish Empire. But if you move the perspective and actually focus on the women, which has not been done before, then you get a totally different perspective. And in fact, the castle was bought with their money. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, the husband of Caroline Lagergren, she was born Russell, he wrote 11 volumes about himself. And Caroline and his next wife, after she gave birth to 3 sons, she died. And then he married her girlfriend, Mary Moore Ogden. None of these women play any, they're not hardly mentioned in his early volumes, but it is their money that bought the castle and everything else. So it's really a true case of the phenomenon sometimes known as the dollar princesses, going back to Churchill's wife and all that. Churchill's mother. And this is extremely interesting. Note how her painting is placed on top of an 18th Chinese wallpaper. People did not like that, but that's how it looked like. And if you pursue her story, then a whole new world opens up, links into America, Fifth Avenue, where she grew up, and to a Newport, a whole new world, which is part of Sweden due to her. Here she's with her brother, and I return to the showcase and say it's exactly the same with Sandra, the girl with the pink scarf. If you pursue her, she's perfect, she's Swedish, she's born in Sweden. But if you pursue her family links, a whole new world opens up. That's also part of Sweden and the north. And totally other grip is to more look at what have we in common. No matter where you're from, how old you are, what social status you have in the north or in Sweden, I promise you one thing, two things. It will be pitch dark for 6 months, and it will be very light for 6 months. And how this situation, rather unique situation, has shaped us and how we shape life. That's what 4 exhibitions at the Nordic Museum were about. They're still there. And another group will open next year, and that is to look at British influences on Swedish and Nordic dress culture, which is gigantic. In fact, 99% of everything we do when we do sport, when we dress, is basically British. And we will, of course, open this exhibition now that Britain is Brexiting. One more example is the Arctic. We have for 2 years, we've had thanks to our Helsinki guest professor, a research project, and on the Arctic, when the ice melts, sometimes in Swedish called hemma i Arktis, very difficult to translate into English. But it's really about people in the Arctic in the light of the climate changes. So it's not about the expeditions. All museums, whenever they do something on the Arctic, they do something on the expeditions. All of these expeditions, they went down. They were unsuccessful. But people have lived in the Arctic for at least 4,000 years, even longer in certain parts. So people living in the Arctic know how to live in the Arctic. These are the people that we want to focus on in this exhibition, which will open next year. It's in wide collaboration with a lot of museums. Now we hope to fill our whole half of the museum with a gigantic installation. It's like melting ice, and you're supposed to walk in through this, gorge and look at the exhibitions. And maybe the roof will be something like that, I hope. Moving to the timeline then. Well, as you will remember from the charter, Arthur said that we should work from 1520 and onwards. And I don't mind that. It's just that if you have to get a perspective on the more recent centuries, you actually also need to have a deeper timeline. Not everything we do today began after 1520. In fact, a lot of things we need to look more back. And I think we need to go from roots and origins. Not all this Greek stuff leading there parallels between Greece and rural Nordic countries. There are parallels, no doubt, but development was never this linear as we sometimes tend to tell our visitors. It's much more complex. And we need to go to more complex and non-linear developments. And I would not mind at all. I think it would be very fitting to have an exhibition in the Nordic Museum about the biggest migration of all, when everyone came from the Blombos cave in South Africa. And the first hands up in that cave, with ochre, which is a fundamental color also in Sweden. 75,000 years ago, I think it's so amazing. And we are out of this. We are still carrying these genes to move, to migrate. So, 5 minutes, good. Audiences. Of course, we also want to be more attractive, more accessible for more people and wider audiences. And we are planning new permanent exhibitions. I will say the keywords maybe for the little discussion that we are going to have afterwards, if you're more curious. And we have for 3 years worked with a strategic plan for the building in Djurgården. We're planning for a new, much more generous floor level, and it is a huge floor level, but today very inaccessible. We have devoted a room under Vasa, he is here, and I don't refer to the ship class, I refer to the stuff. Under here, and it's a huge room which we have devoted to children. It's still being under construction, so I can't really tell you what the title is more precisely, but it's certainly going to be something about meeting people in time and space for children between 6 and 12. Next week or end of this month, we will open a new shop on the ground floor with a more Nordic, much more Nordic approach. And on the back side, which has been turned into a back side facing Vasa and the Royal Castle, we are planning a new outdoor environment. We've had quite a lot of help and financial help from the city and other institutions. And here we will create what we like to call a backyard with a focus on green heritage, food and drink history. We have a lovely little house here, which will be a kind of cafe and shop. And we use furniture from these will be copied. And we will of course have Arthur's dog, Sitkis, extremely important in bronze. He was originally supposed to be killed and stuffed and exhibited, but then everyone thought it was so sweet, so he ended up as a curator dog, taking people around in the museum at Arthur's time. And we are going to have a new entrance towards the Vasa Museum. And this is extremely important. It sounds banal to you, but I promise you, all the people are at Vasa Museum. And there are 50 million people passing over that little bridge leading to Djurgården, and we're the first museum to the right. Vasa is the second. And there are also a lot of other initiatives which means that this whole area around the Vasa is bringing in people. And we really need to open up the museum. So the entrance, it's not really what it's going to look like. It's sort of an imaginative picture. But I can promise you, I cannot reveal, but I can promise you it will be very beautiful. I cannot reveal the artist because we haven't sort of publicized that yet, but it is all being planned, and the artist who's going to decorate this, I can assure you will give you an Arctic feeling, and I will not say anything more. This was it. Thank you for your attention, and then looking very much forward to our collaboration, because we will need to collaborate with all of you and many more. So thank you.
Okay, hello, good morning everybody. As was presented, my name is Peter Stadius and I'm going to make a comment this keynote, and I have two themes. Firstly, what's in a name? Secondly, what is in a building? And first, what is in a name? Nordiska. mentioned here, I mean, are there regional museums and how are they thematizing a region? And what is the content of Nordisk Museum and what's the name? I mean, there is in Dahlem in Berlin, there is the Museum for Europäische Kultur, which used to be the Museum for Deutsche Kultur. So, without going further into the German history in the recent centuries, there's a shift away from the national towards transnational European, for various reasons of which are quite obvious. The story with the Nordic Museum, the Nordisk Museum, is directly opposite. The original idea was to promote a Scandinavian Nordic identity. And then for various reasons time went on, and when finally the entire building was finished and inaugurated in 1907, it was the end of a process that was simultaneous with the breakup of the union between Norway and Sweden, which made this Nordic idea very nationalistic, Swedish and chauvinistic also, like all the countries were chauvinistic at that time, I think. I mean, we have the statue of Charles X, called the Dione, with all the victorious battles, and of course the main 1658. So I mean, that's not very friendly, I would say, from a Danish point of view. So what is in the name? Nordiska Museet, as it is in Swedish and Scandinavian, when it translates in the global era to Nordic Museum, it becomes something different. And the new initiative, the new recently opened museum in Seattle, the Nordic Museum, which has the same exact name, I think it's interesting to think what are the differences and how are the situations between these two museums. I have not been in Seattle. I've looked at their homepage, and my impression, and it would be interesting to hear if anybody in the audience has been there or maybe works there, or I'd be very curious. I mean, it's the kind of mix of Nordic heritage, Scandinavian heritage in North America, Nordic Scandinavian modernity, the modern design, Nordic modernity, social innovation, all this that basically also is now part of the Nordic branding in the global world. And we can ask the question, what is the function of putting Norden on display in Seattle? And what is the function of putting Norden on display in Stockholm? How do we look at Norden and research it from the outside and from the inside? Now, of course, as was mentioned here, the main objective of the Nordisk Museum is to portray life and work in Sweden. This is a long debate because Sweden as the central country with the most inhabitants in Norden often kind of used simultaneously Sweden and Norden, Scandinavia, they can be everything. And in Finland, Norden is Sweden, but I won't go into that now. I think we have a lot of cultural institutions that have their like statues from 150 years back. And I think that is a great error to be too literary. I mean, it's like reading, if we read the Bible and believe that people live today 800, 900 years, it can hinder us. I think we also need to be more interpretive with these statues. I mean, we have cultural institutions also in this country that started out with the initiative to fabricate 30 pair of shoes every year. And now the situation is that they have the capacity to fabricate 3 million shoes every year. And that's what they do. I think they could maybe alter read the statues again and be more somehow innovative. The Seattle thing, I call it Nordicana. We have the symbols, from Dala horses to hygge to baby boxes, social intervention, and also part of this Viking legacy of primordial vitality translated into dynamic, globalized business discourse. And then, of course, the nature, the untouched nature, the pure nature. I think there is a certain risk in this discourse. And we're debating this a lot with some colleagues of mine. I mean, you all heard about Nordic noir, but I would also talk about Nordic naive. I mean, I can enter into numerous times into hotels in the Nordic countries, and you have this small soap, and it says Nordic Pure, Nordic White. Well, I exaggerate a little bit, but you get my point. There are some pitfalls here. And of course, there are also different points of view. We are very Anglophile at the moment. The exhibition about everything coming from Britain, it's interesting, but I think something came from Germany and France also. Yeah. Well, I know, I mean, you have to, you have to make it work. So, returning to the question, what to put a display in the Nordic region. If you speak about Nordism, the idea of the Nordic common identity, sense of belonging. There is Scandinavism in the 19th century, and then there is this idea of Nordic cooperation and a Nordic common identity, sense of belonging. And that is born early 20th century. And the difference from Nordism towards Scandinavism is that the Nordism is as a consequence of, for example, the breakup of the Union and the independence of Finland. It's like the main dogma is that we respect the national sovereignty of every country. So it's this family metaphor. And the kind of minimal point of departure, the only thing that everybody could be kind of support and sanction was the idea that in all Nordic countries, the Nordists would promote knowledge about the other Nordic countries. And if you have Nordisk Museet, that could be maybe one point of departure. However, to display Nordic cooperation, that's the most unsexy thing to make an exhibition of. and so, but still the main idea of Peter Stadius Helsingin, it was about his self was a Nordic self, Scandinavian self, I will proclaim. I think the later then made it into a Swedish self somehow. So now when we're talking about, there's a lot of this new Norden, new Nordic museum, new Nordic food. We are living in an era where history is kind of not so important in many ways. It's more like looking forward about being a competitive region, nation in a globalized world in the English language. A comment to some of the things. I mean, this human geographies thing, I think, is a very good approach and a way of going outside these life and work in Sweden. But I must go on now. And what's in a building? I love the Nordic Museum as a building. It's always been not always, but for a long time, been my favorite. And when I prepared this, without really knowing what I was going to talk about, I had this idea that I often ask my students, I've done many excursions with students who've always got to Nordisk Museum, and I say, do you know the Nordisk Museum? No. It's like, it's a huge building. It's a huge building, you can't miss it. No, we haven't really seen it. No. Everybody has been in that bloody small shack called Unibacken, which is behind. And it's like a David Copperfield thing. He made the Statue of Liberty disappear. It's the big building that kind of disappears out of itself, because every building is a text. We know that. And the Nordisk Museum as a building, as a facade, is a splendid text. It's a very rich text. It's a very pedagogical text and a very clear text about Swedish grandeur. Nordic Renaissance is the given name of this national romantic interpretation, with the North Star, Polar Star, Nordstjärnan, Polstjärnan, with all the inscriptions, with all those monuments, all those Petri, and all this that stands there. And the question is, can we read it? Do we need to read it? Is it dangerous to know how to read it? That is a question I kind of would like to pose, because I think it's important that we still can read the text and try to understand why. There are two statues on Djurgården, correct me if I'm wrong, outdoor in the public space. days. One is the Charles X, and the second one is Astrid Lindgren. And they're very close to each other. Unibacken is the picturesque, nostalgic feeling of pre-modern Heimat figure for the Germans who have been morally denied this. And there is this name Bullaby syndrome for this in Germany. The Vasa Museum is unique in the world, magnificent as an object, but also very suitable as a low-key story of failure when building a Baltic military power. So in this story, the Nordic Museum is an insane building. We don't want to see it. And I think we still need to open it up, the facade. And inside we have Gustav Vasa, Carbilles, I think, in oak. And it was finished in 1925, 5 years before the Stockholm exhibition of 1930, which is generally held as the turning point of Swedish modernity, Nordic modernity, functionalism, the people's home. And in that sense, also Stockholm, Djurgården, not only Djurgården, it's a battleground of different texts of tradition, the national romantic, pre-modern or let's say 19th century bourgeoisie, and on the other hand, the discourse of modernity. And there was an image that Sanne, you had there of that, where you could see how big the building is, Claeson's building. And in the background were the 5 skyscrapers, the 5 trumpetstötarna, the Norrmalmsregleringen. And it's very interesting because that's exactly the two competing, in a way, discourses. And one could go on the story and the debates about the City Hall in Stockholm, the Maritime Museum that was erected on the premises where the Stockholm exhibition had been, with the support of some of these Wallenberg, one of Knut Alice Wallenberg Foundation, stating that it shall not be built in a functionalist style. So there is a kind of, if we speak about from the inside perspective, there is this kind of battle going on. To wrap this up, yeah, I had to mention the ABBA Museum, but let's leave that. I mean, they have 2 cellars there. On the one hand, we have the building and the physical environment and the kind of odd thing. I mean, I'm always asking questions, why is it so invisible? I'm not going to get it, you should do that, you should do this, but somehow that you have the name the Nordic, I think it can be somehow used also in the Mason. I mean, this sounds very interesting, and I didn't know also that you have so much. I mean, I go to the museum, I think about the building, and also thinking about one thing that also came up was that you have 46 different exhibitions. I didn't understand, was that within the main building? Or, yeah, and that kind of confirms the image I have also, that it's kind of like, I think it's kind of a deliberate kind of downplaying the grandeur, and because the whole building oozes this grandeur. And how do we cope with grandeur? In France, they have no problem coping with grandeur. But how is it in Sweden and the Nordic countries? I think I stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Peter Stadius, excellent comments, and Sanne Houby-Nielsen, very good presentation about what you are planning at the Nordiska Museet. Would you like to comment?
Yes. I would like to thank you very much for. Is it on? Yeah, good. Thank you very much for giving me this very variable feedback. And I think I would like to first comment on your last word, grandeur, because this is something that I actually really agree on. And I jumped over these keywords when we were working with the new permanent exhibitions. And as you can see, I actually included grand historical overviews. Because yes, we have many exhibitions, and one of the reasons that there are so many exhibitions is that the house is so big, and it means that over the years, and you have to go by funding and so forth. So over the years, one small section has been taken down and a new has been added. So it's a little bit like a puzzle. And it means, of course, that as I started out by saying, people love the museum, but they have often not been there. And they can remember certain things like the swan up at the exhibition called the Dukade Bål. But then, but then that's sort of what they can remember. They don't remember. They have not left the museum with a grand overview. And I like the word, and I stand for the word, grand historical overviews. What we are planning now, but need more funding for, is to devote the upper floor to one big grand overview of Sweden from a Nordic and global perspective over sort of the last 500 years. But as I think I told you, our timelines will be much softer, much more creative. We take the liberty to dive into much longer perspectives in order to understand and present and grasp our we people today. So one floor devoted to one big overview where people can actually walk through, and where the hope is that when you have left that exhibition, you actually left with our curatorial narrative. And of course we will use inclusive methods. Of course we will try and work with this exhibition and include wider audiences in this, but we will not leave our curatorial expertise. I think that's very important also, never to leave it. We work with fever and passion because you have to do that. When you are in a museum like this, you cannot cool down a building like this, if you understand what I mean. This building is grand, and you have to sort of go on the same level as the building. The second floor, from above, will be more, we will target it more for our dress collections, and will be varying exhibitions on dress culture, and using our collections there to open up towards the world. And of course, Germany, many other, not countries but regions, people, cultures have influenced us. The first one will be more about British culture and Romania. And then the floor level, not the lowest, but the floor level at the Gustav Vasa, we will devote, at the moment, we're devoting it to temporary exhibitions, and I suppose that's what we will do also in the future. And so that was one comment. Yes, we need grand narratives. I think that museums should never sort of retire from their. I think it is a duty to present interpretations for the audience. But of course, as I talked about yesterday, it's very important to also be open and be certain that people understand that there are different ways, of course, to understand the past. But we should not retire from giving these overviews. Now, the other thing that I think maybe I should clarify is a minor thing, and that is that we're not going to term the Nordisk Museum the new Nordic Museum. This is more, the PowerPoint is a little bit from internal use when we have staff meetings and so forth. The museum in Seattle, I've been there twice, and it's very different. I have a great admiration for the speed with which this museum has been created and the energy behind the project. And I think we have not seen, we've only seen the beginning. The museum has only opened. At the moment, it's very much sort of piling up the Scandinavian countries next to each other, giving sort of individual overviews of each country. And I think you asked for how the Nordic Museum will work. And we're not at all working. The ambition is not at all to work with piling up countries next to each other. We're not, as I say, flag history. We're sort of dealing with people. And that's why I talked a bit about the human geographies. And I think you're absolutely right when you talk about the statuses of a museum and the charters. Of course, you cannot work with them too literally. In this case, however, I have personally found it extremely gratifying to actually go back to Museonjohtaja. And I think I understood from your talk that you were likewise impressed also by the building and by Arthur's achievement, because you can say what you want, but he did the building and he didn't have any money. He had a vision, a very strong vision. It was not a bad vision. It was just not the vision you would have today. But he had a vision and you went for it. And it's something about this entrepreneur, doer mentality that I have huge admiration for. And exactly as you said, today the building is our most popular object. We have made several investigations, and what are people Instagramming, what are they talking about on TripAdvisor, on social media, the building. And it's a monument of a time, it's a monument you cannot overlook, and maybe you don't like it, maybe you like it, but it's there. It's a physical monument of how people thought at this period. And this is why we have turned all our attention to the building and worked with a plan to actually make this building stand out much more in accordance with how it looked when it was new. And in this sense, we are working a little bit like the National Museum in Stockholm, which will open this month. And they have also gone back and sort of tried to clean the building and make the building stand out. And this is, I could not go too much into detail with this, but this is definitely our ambition as well. You have to remember that what you're looking at here is the entrance building. It was supposed to be 3 times as big. There's 3 other wings that were never built. And this is why it is, believe it or not, but we have too little room in this building. Believe it or not, because it's designed as an entrance building. It's designed as for people to walk around in these galleries, look at exhibitions, and to look at each other, to experience Scandinavia together. A very modern idea. But it's not designed for having magazine storerooms, all of these very demanding facilities that a museum needs today. So all of these facilities we have to take out of the building and into a new wing. So there are many problems with this building, but that's because it's been sort of forced to be something it was never meant to be. And now we want it to function as it was meant to function. And it's a very modern idea. I think the City Museum talked, yesterday was a good example of museums as meeting places and so forth. Very successful success story. And this is a meeting place. It's meant as a meeting place. And it's not meant for a meeting place for sort of the club society at that time. It had a sort of a social dimension. It was really sort of the people. And it's that kind of things that has turned me back to look at what did Arthur actually want. And you asked finally about the Nordic. Yes. Yes, it is a schizophrenic situation, and I think you described it very well. First Nordic Union, then not Union, and the museum went back to being Swedish, and for a long time launched itself as a museum for Sweden trends and traditions, I think. But we cannot run away from the name, and I said Nordiska. It forces us to look at Sweden with outside views, forces us to disregard the nation states, the borders, look at the people. And I think that is that's really the challenge. And that's why I think it has been a very productive and gratifying thing to actually go back to look at the statues and see what was it, what was the idea of this museum, and how can you sort of modernize that idea. And that's, I think, the ambition. I'm not sure I've answered all your questions, but I hope we can continue debating this. It's an ongoing subject. So thank you very much for your